Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rigdon. On this episode of the show, we're talking to Kevin Grimm of The Daily Bit. The Daily Bit is a newsletter covering crypto and the blockchain. If you're into the blockchain, then you know there are a ton of crypto newsletters out there, but The Daily Bit is one of the best. I highly suggest subscribing. The link is in the show notes, but before we get to the interview, I have this short message. Hello, if you like this episode and you want to hear more like it, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll get every single episode. The Talking Cryptocurrency podcast is available on all podcast clients. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if podcasts aren't your thing, I publish video versions of these interviews on YouTube and DTube, so you can subscribe there too. All the links to all that stuff is going to be in the show notes. So please, if you want to hear more of this show, subscribe. Hello, and on this episode, I'm here with Kevin Grimm of The Daily Bit. How are you today?
Hey, Jason. Doing good. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So could you tell me a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve here?
Sure. So to do that, I guess I should start with my background and how I got involved in the space to begin. So I graduated from Georgetown with a finance and accounting background, and that led me over to work at Credit Suisse as an analyst. And while I was there at the firm, I was reading through publications just for interesting articles to stay sharp and kind of keep up to date with what's going on in the finance world when I came across an article in The Economist on blockchain. And that was around last June. And I was very thrown by the terminology. I wasn't sure what was going on with Bitcoin mining, hash rate. That was really just over my head at the time. But I thought that the potential implications of the tech were profound. They were definitely interesting. I wanted to learn more about that. I saw that there was definitely some, promise in secure databases and increasing data transparency. And I saw that there was definitely a problem to solve there, and blockchain was a potential solution. So from there, I went on my proverbial trip down the rabbit hole, I guess you could say, where I'd be coming home from work and I was staying up until probably 3 or 4 a.m. reading about Bitcoin, blockchain, finding any articles I really could about the industry, whether it be Cointelegraph, any threads even on crypto Twitter. I was really just looking for anything I could get my hands on and just to try to get more immersed in the space. And it was super exciting for me, and I was convincing myself that I really wanted to make a career out of it. And that went on for several months before I ultimately left my role at Credit Suisse to found the Daily Bit with my two business partners in November. And the reason that we ended up deciding that we should even go down that journey and start the Daily Bit was during my exploration of the space, I found that there weren't many resources that I could personally rely upon. I mean, granted, I was very comfortable with making that effort to learn anything that I really could. I really wanted to make a career out of this. I think that was evident after a couple of weeks and months just going into this, so on and so forth. But I found that there were a number of articles that were often criticized for inaccuracies, and more importantly, I struggled to find resources that deliver news in, number one, a conversational way, and number two, that also went the extra mile to bring added value to the reader. Most of the articles that I came across were generally a regurgitation, at least in my opinion, of original press releases. And on top of that, there were 5, 6, 7 outlets, and potentially more even now, that were all just creating their unique spin on that original post with additional fluff that often didn't really bring much value to myself beyond vague if-thens on future speculation. So I didn't really think there was much content that was going to be beneficial for my learning experience there. And in general, just thinking about how this was going to be adopted by my friends or picked up by anybody that I just knew who wasn't really going down that journey like I was, I didn't think that there was ever going to be anybody I knew day to day that was going to pledge their loyalty to a news outlet. And I thought the likelihood of that was quite low. Again, there wasn't really anything that I found that was going above and beyond and providing that daily analysis of the space that sounded as if it came from a friend's mouth and was really something that he wanted to tune into every day. And that's obviously not saying that there aren't a number of great resources out there. I'm myself subscribed to several publications today, and everybody has their own tone and voice that they're trying to connect with their readers with. However, I think that there's definitely a massive shortage in educational on-ramps. I mean, that's certainly evident from the lack of transparency and just a lack of general understanding about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology in general, that aren't, number one, driven by self-interest, whether it be a newsletter or a publication that's really just looking to, quote unquote, pump their bags or give misleading information to, again, be driven by self-interest, or also providing consistently great and engaging material for your readers and for their readers. So that's what the Daily Bit is trying to solve there.
And how are you solving this? Was this a newsletter?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a firm believer, number one, that for blockchain and Bitcoin to become household terms, news outlets need to be relatable to the masses. I mean, this is with every industry. You have to find a way to really tap into these networks of people that aren't really engaged with your space right now. I mean, we're in this really specific niche where originally it started on these online forums where people were tuning into Satoshi's emails and really expanding there over to Reddit, Bitcoin Talk forums, and whatnot. But in order to really make that shift, anybody that's really working a 9-to-5 isn't going to change their schedule that they've been following for years on end in order to really make room for blockchain content. And human habits are really hard to change. So we're not going to really be able to do that if we're talking to people as if they're looking to be experts or even semi-experts in the field. Quite frankly, most people could really care less about technical implications. It's like an airplane. I mean, there are many folks that care about how airplanes work. They don't care about how airplanes work. They just want to know that the airplanes do work. I mean, they'd rather receive reliable information that still has enough substance to make use of in their lives, while just being able to go about their daily lives and not really get bogged down by these extraneous details that they're just really never going to make use of and will most likely forget at the end of the day. And on top of that, outlets, I also just think, need to drive home at least two key facets. Number one, education, and number two, just engaging, compelling material that isn't going to really just make you disinterested by the end of the article or the end of the post. And again, that goes back to my first point. Most people aren't really looking to become a blockchain or Bitcoin scholar. So I think news outlets really need to offer a compelling blend of content that cuts through the noise, is trustworthy, and will leave them holding their side at the end of each edition with hopefully a couple laughs. I mean, whether or not those land, that's something that we're trying to make sure we have more of, certainly than less of. But that's the goal with the Daily Bit, is to provide that unique, mesh of valuable and also relatable education.
Yeah, it's surprising how hard it is to find quality content about cryptocurrency and the blockchain. There is so much noise out there. Like you're saying, so many things are being kind of recycled or regurgitated. I kind of blame some of these bounty programs where they are kind of encouraging people just to write massive amounts of blog posts, but no real actual content.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, it's interesting when we're looking at these incentive structures that a lot of these ICOs, which, by the way, I think the ICO model is completely just it's imploded at this point, in my opinion. I really think that it's really seen more as a fundraising model. I think that's very clear. But the incentive structures and mechanisms that companies are putting forth in order to incentivize further participation by community members, I mean, there's not really a reliable checks and balances system, right, to make sure that the material that's being reported is being done in good faith. And I think there are definitely some corners that are being cut with some bounty programs in terms of if X, then Y. And a lot of people are substituting in quality content for just content in order to make sure they get paid out in a currency that is untested and really is just creating more friction for the end user at the end of the day. I mean, most of these projects, from what I've seen, really just aren't going to reach much adoption. I mean, we look at the daily usage of the amount of users on dApps, and those numbers, I think the total daily active users for dApps was around 10,000 across the entire spectrum. So, I mean, again, if we're just looking at the App Store, I think there's 25,000 downloads of the top apps in the App Store per day. So it's, and again, don't quote me on that stat, but if that's accurate, I mean, we're just so far away from making a seamless experience for users, and making sure that there's quality reporting and reliable content is a huge challenge. And until that's really out there, it's only going to slow the actual acceptance and conversation around this market.
Yeah, there's so much friction in using these things. Even the most popular, well, I believe it's the most popular kind of blockchain app of the CryptoKitties. It's so hard just to get a CryptoKitty. People get so discouraged.
Yeah. I actually never personally purchased or used CryptoKitties, but I did a great amount of reading about it. And there's this one article that Nick Grossman wrote. He works with USV. He works with Union Square Ventures, and the whole aspect of non-fungible tokens and how you can have ownership that's attached to NFTs themselves. So, for example, if you purchased I think that idea is super interesting. So, for example, if you wanted to purchase a hat for your CryptoKitty and you ended up selling that CryptoKitty, you also sell ownership of the hat. You don't own the hat. Your CryptoKitty owns the hat. So there's this cascading concept of digital ownership in these non-fungible goods that is something we really don't see in the traditional world. Like if you bought a hat for your actual cat, you don't have to sell that cat if you decided to throw Mr. Whiskers up on the market. So like there's these changing concepts that are really still taking shape. And I think another thing about non-fungible tokens is that there's this idea that, okay, we can kind of bootstrap this, or we can kind of, bootstrap this whole idea of creating these scarce goods and crafting these scarce goods and making them valuable. But in order for them to really be valuable, we have to make sure that there's value to be captured and there's an actual demand for the product. There are these non-fungible MLB collectibles that recently went to market, and I wrote a blog post about this the other day, actually, questioning whether or not the total supply of the cards is going to be something that's going to address the total user base of the market. Just kind of looking at the amount of baseball cards that are currently circulating in the physical world. I think the digital baseball cards were around 15,000 total, and I think there's too much of a restriction around supply, and there's not really much. I think deeper exploration has to go into how to actually peg value to these non-fungible tokens before we can actually understand how to best apply them in these markets. But still definitely something that's super interesting. And in terms of the use cases going forward, I really do think that this is going to be one of the most interesting aspects of the space, because you can create digital markets around these goods. And that's confirmed. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones are going to land in the long term.
Yeah, there's so these kind of novel mechanics, and it's hard to sometimes get your brain around how the consequences of them. Some of them look really good at first, and then they kind of fade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess that's one of the things we're seeing now with VCs. I mean, venture capitalists know that blockchain's hot, and they know that these token-based models were definitely attractive in 2017. They're kind of losing interest in 2018. The total ICO funding for July compared to other months in 2018 took a notable hit. I believe there's a figure on Cointelegraph to confirm that. But in terms of where they're pulling their money, I mean, most venture capital model is based off of these home runs, and there's really only a handful of investments that are actually going to produce these magnificent returns, and most are going to fail. So we're going to see a ton of projects pop up that are going to look really interesting. I mean, we're, as many people like to say, we're in the early days of this space. So there's this huge draw and lure to looking into these projects, exploring what could potentially work, what looks like there's going to be this great adoption. And there's a lot of hopium, I guess, around what's going to be successful at the end of the day. But in order to actually know what is a viable project, you have to be proficient in reading through code, and you really do have to have an engineering background. And most retail investors, which encompass the majority of investors right now in the space, I mean, institutional money is still sitting on the sidelines for the most part, just because there are still so many obstructions and bottlenecks that need to be taken care of in order for them to be comfortable executing not only their own trading strategies to take advantage of these markets, but also to incorporate blockchain solutions into their day-to-day businesses. That it's really just retail investors that are way over their heads in terms of understanding the ins and the outs of what's going on in this market. And everybody has agendas at the end of the day. So if you invested money into something and you want to see something work, then obviously you're going to be pushing for positive conversation around those products. And that's where you see a lot of marketing efforts that are going into this ideation and kind of proliferation of what's really half-baked ideas. And you're not really going to know that until there's a considerable amount of money that's already plugged into these investments. So, I mean, in terms of my personal background, I'm far from being able to kind of go into the code and understand. So that's where I also have to understand my shortcomings, where I can't fully evaluate everything either. But in taking a more practical stance of how I'm talking about the space with the Daily Bit, it's doing my homework and making sure that I'm not really just looking at these articles that are posted on every website. I'm also going into additional outlets, reading through venture capital blogs. I'm a huge fan of Union Square Ventures. Andreessen Horowitz has incredible material too. And then also going into podcasts as well, and finding the time to make sure that I have a comprehensive overview of things that are relevant and things that may not be subject to kind of these ebbs and flows in reliable reporting. So it's a huge problem for sure. I guess that's my long-winded answer to your question.
So what have been your biggest problems? Is it mostly that information gathering stage?
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely a few that come to mind. I think the obvious challenge for myself and our team is making sure that we're maintaining our consistency. Sam Altman with Y Combinator, he mentioned in one of his posts that a successful startup consists of four things. You need to have a great idea, and that includes a great market. You have to have a great team. You need a great product, and you have to have great execution on all of that. And of those, I think the most important ones are a great idea and a great product. So you can have a great team and a great execution, but at the end of the day, if you don't have product market fit, your startup isn't going to get off the ground. I mean, if there's, you can be in your echo chamber with your team bouncing off these great ideas that you think are going to land. But again, if nobody wants to buy apples, you're not going to be able to grow an orchard. That's really what it comes down to. And I think we've done a good job in retaining and growing our current user base. So that's an indication to myself that we've achieved at least some degree of product market fit. However, our content is graded on a new scale every single day. So we can have an awesome post to begin the week in the newsletter where we have a lot of great feedback. We have a lot of signups come in from referrals and just kind of increased engagement with our content. But if we then continue to release a mediocre post on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, then everything that we've put together kind of falls into shambles. So it's making sure that we do a good job in curating important material and making sure that we're kind of we don't have tunnel vision in thinking about what to include in our posts, and just making sure that we cast a wide net about what's going on in the market and making sure that we cover all appropriate material there. And then also relaying that to our audience in a voice that they're comfortable with. And that's definitely been a big problem with myself, and something that I just have to make sure that we're consistently doing for our readers. Because if we kind of lose sight of our voice and end up sounding like, I guess, a run-of-the-mill outlet that doesn't necessarily have as much flexibility as we do in terms of how we're kind of styling our content, I think that just puts us into the norm, and we just become a general publication, which isn't something that I initially set out to do. And then there's really just growing the business itself, making sure that we're doing everything we can, not only to continue to make users aware of our brand, but again, like I mentioned, just that we're doing our homework and staying informed of what's going on in the market. So finding that balance between the hours spent building out the business and making sure that I build up a knowledge base that I can then use to bring added value to our readers is something that is super challenging at times, especially because our team is so small. So it's just figuring out what we can do in terms of growth, figuring out what pain points we're currently seeing right now with that growth, and developing these strategies and constantly iterating upon these tests that we're doing to make sure that we can continue to scale out our content and make sure that we don't paint ourselves too thin.
And how are you monetizing the business?
Sure. So right now we're focusing really on just scaling our user base. There's a couple of options that we have in order to go about monetization. There's a few other publications out there for the space that have thrown up paywalls, at least for the cryptocurrency market, and that's something that I personally don't want to do. I mean, if there's already an educational gap in content, I don't want to alienate users further that are just looking for reliable content to throw up a paywall. So that's something that is on the table, but we're kind of hesitant to approach. And the other option right away is through advertising and sponsors. And we've already received several requests about sponsorships for the letter, but again, we want to make sure that we're making sure that we focus on what we know right now, which is producing this material, and we don't want to get bogged down with advertisers right now. There's also the process of vetting our advertisers and making sure that they're falling in line with our values, and making sure that they're also producing reliable content and bringing trustworthy and interesting products to market that are, again, going to propel the space forward rather than creating additional noise. So those are two means that we're currently looking at, but right now just focused on making sure that we're growing our brand presence and sticking to our mission, which is to make sure that we can serve as this newsletter and kind of publication that's going to be continuously bringing interesting material to the market.
Yeah, that sounds like those priorities are pretty fantastic. So what are your plans for the future going forward?
Sure. So at the end of the day, we want to be more than a newsletter. I mean, the Daily Bit originally was a means for me to get more involved in the space. I mean, when I was back at school, I always found myself as being one of the people that were very comfortable in serving as, I guess, the teacher leading up to an exam. So just running any of my friends through potential content before a test, just making sure that they're familiar. So writing about the space and I guess taking on that teaching role again was something that was relatively easy for me to do. It offered me a means to get involved in the space, and I've only continued to grow from there. But from there, we want to continue to scale our product we want to continue to scale our product offering and make sure that we that our trust with our users is going to continue to grow and ultimately turn into a community where people will see our brand name and know that they can come to us and know that they're not going to have bland content or dry content and also just a regurgitation. We want to be a reliable news source where people can know that, again, the Daily Bit is going to be something that they're going to be comfortable reading, whether or not it's their first trip around the block of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, or whether or not they've been around for a while, but are looking for something that's a little more conversational and a little more laid back in its delivery. And again, just in order to do that, we have to make sure that we have the right people on our team, and we're constantly looking to our users to make sure that we're producing something that they want, because it's super easy to kind of step away from them and try to build something out and see if really just make sure that we have product market fit at the end of the day. So it's a constant maneuvering of going into the back office and thinking out these ideas and seeing where we can allocate our time and our resources into expanding our offering for everybody out there, and making sure that we're doing it in a unique and compelling way that's going to differentiate ourselves from other products out there. And I think we've been doing, again, a pretty stellar job at that right now. It's just a matter of making sure that we're consistent, that we're focused, and we're kind of polishing everything where we can, and making sure that we offer a good customer experience for everybody that's involved.
Well, I really admire your vision and priorities. Is there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
Coming to mind, not really. I mean, in terms of something that I definitely recommend people take a look at. If anybody's looking for material outside of newsletters, and also if you want to just learn more about our site and the Daily Bit and what we're doing, I encourage you to check out www.thedailybit.news. You can check out our newsletter there. You can subscribe to our mailing list if you want to learn more and you want to kind of stay in line with what we're doing day to day. We have a blog on Medium where we have interviews with founders and influencers in the space. We just posted a conversation that we had with Loy Liu, the CEO and co-founder of Kyber Network. That was a really awesome conversation. And we have one with Dr. Gemma Green of Power Ledger coming out in a couple of days as well, and several more queued up that we're just kind of working on and slowly chipping away and hoping to get those out to our audience as well. Otherwise, you can follow us on Twitter at the Daily Bit News. And otherwise, in terms of just, again, looking for new material, I definitely encourage anybody to take a look at Crypto Twitter, to not get bogged down in Crypto Twitter, because it's definitely a black hole. But if you're looking for new material to read, Medium is probably the best place to start. I have an awesome resource list, and there are a number of great resources out there as well. That is really just an aggregate list of everything that I've really found helpful to learn about the space. So if you want to take a look at that, check out my Medium page, Kevin Grimm, and there is an article going down the rabbit hole that just has a list of everything that I've found helpful, from tweet threads to podcasts to a couple of academic papers even. But if you want a jump off point to kind of get more, reading, and you really want to build that out, then I definitely suggest there. But otherwise, if you want to get involved in the space, just really, if there's something you're interested in, don't hesitate to reach out to anybody. I mean, building out a business in blockchain, I mean, it's difficult and it's super challenging, and there's a lot of work to be done on the ground. I mean, that's really what it is for any startup. But the businesses today, comparatively to traditional organizations, your Google, your Facebook, if they're 50 stories tall, then these blockchain companies are really only 3 or 4. So it's much easier to kind of get in touch with these founders and really reach out to these development teams and anybody that can really get you helpful information. And there's a lot more opportunity for you to kind of lend a helping hand if you think you can. So definitely, I encourage people to consider that option for getting more involved, and just kind of keep on reading up where you can and making sure that you stay up to date with stuff, because this space moves incredibly fast. And I mean, 3 months down the road, the market's going to probably be entirely different from what it looks like today. So just keep on iterating and making sure that you're staying up to everything. But other than that, that's really all I have.
I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Kevin, for coming on the show. Once again, I gotta suggest that you subscribe to the Daily Bit. They put so much work into this newsletter. You can tell they really respect your time and they have a passion for this space. If you want to learn more about the Daily Bit, check out the show notes. I've got all the links down there. You've been listening to Talking Cryptocurrency Podcast. My name is Jason Rigdon and I have been your host. Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked it, would you please consider giving us a rating and review on iTunes? I look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.